welcome back to the Box Office Babbler. I'm Babbling Ben, your host. Today we're going to talk about the film War Games and computer hacking. Hope you enjoy it. Let's get into it. You have successfully hacked into what you think is a gaming company's computer network for the sole purpose of trying out new games before they debut. You see some about biowarfare or nuclear warfare. Wondering what the apocalypse would look like, you decide to give it a shot. Unknowingly, you have just started World War III. Before I get further into the film, let me mention what I do for a living. I'm sure some of you are curious about that. In real life, I am a cybersecurity engineer. From the offset, let me state that to avoid a conflict of interest, I will not mention who I work for. I will also not mention any cybersecurity products by name. I will only talk about best practices. Now that I've got the legal disclaimer out of the way, let's talk about the film. The film was credited to John Badham after the original director was fired. Badham also directed hits like Saturday Night Fever, Short Circuit, and Bird on a Wire. It stars Matthew Broderick, Dabney Coleman, John Wood, and Ali Sheedy. Both Broderick and Sheedy were 20 at the time. This film jump-started their careers, and it was the first of many, many hits for Broderick. The plot is a little complex. There are some multiple plot lines that eventually collide. We'll start with a training exercise, where military leaders discover that airmen are hesitant to turn the keys to launch nuclear missiles. Dr. John McKittrick, played by Coleman, determines that the process needs to be automated. The military turns to a super programmer, Dr. Stephen Falcon, played by Wood, to develop a supercomputer they dub Whopper. WOPR. Whopper will do the job that people are not willing or are hesitant to do. Elsewhere in the country, a teenage hacker named David Lightman, portrayed by Broderick, has figured out how to break into computers. Early, he breaks into his school computer and changes some of his grades and the grades of his gal pal Jennifer, who is played by Sheedy. He's a gaming enthusiast. He uses a hacking technique called war dialing to find other computers to crack into. Before the internet, modems were how computers would talk to other computers. You may not know the term war dialing, but I'm sure you've experienced its effects. This is where a phone will call each number in an area code to try and find out where the other computers and fax machines are. Lightman discovers the modem belonging to a computer game company in Sunnyvale, California, and this is where all the plots combine. Lightman discovers games using weapons of mass destruction, except they weren't really games. At first, he is unable to gain access to the games, but then once learning a little bit about the programmer, guesses that the password is the name of the programmer's dead son. Then, when all hell breaks loose, Lightman believes he is playing a game, but NORAD believes that the Soviet Union has launched missiles on the United States. The computer keeps playing the game, but the Soviets have not launched their missiles. Lightman is discovered and is accused of being a Soviet spy. Eventually, the developer of Whopper is contacted. He explains that Whopper has an AI engine that uses machine learning. They teach a computer to play tic-tac-toe, learning that it would always end in a stalemate. The computer is then programmed to give up. They use the same logic to teach Whopper the concept of mutually assured destruction, and then it shuts down. The film did exceptionally well at the box office, earning United Artists 10 times its budget. It cost a little over $12 million to produce. It earned over $120 million. I will now talk about some of the hacking techniques used in this film. Before I get into that, I will explain that I am a veteran of the United States Air Force. I spent much of my enlistment at US Stratcom near Omaha. I can assure you that nuclear weapons technology and associated systems are the most closely guarded secrets in the United States military. Those secrets are air-gapped from the public internet, or at least they were when I was in the service. Hopefully that still is the case. These systems still need to communicate over media, so it is possible to hack. About as possible as Tyra Banks finding me attractive. The likelihood that someone is going to crack into the system just to launch weapons is infinitesimally small, thankfully. It's not zero, just highly unlikely. Hopefully, that will help you sleep better. Also, when I was in the service, and this was in the late 1990s, the process of launching nuclear weapons still had not been automated. I don't know if that's changed, but hopefully they've at least updated the systems. Artificial intelligence and machine learning I will discuss in another episode. I think there's a film better suited for that topic, coming soon. AI in theory was not a new concept in the early 80s. It had been discussed in computing circles as early as the 1950s. Automation has been a concept since the beginning of the industrial age. It's just computerized now. But what I want to address is the concepts that made this whole process, this whole plot possible. When war games came out, hacking was a relatively new term, but not a new concept. Modems have been around since the 1950s. Since computers have been able to communicate over media, there has always been a way to intrude into these communications. Passwords are not new either. Neither is the concept of trying to guess them. In the movie, Matthew Broderick's character uses a concept to get the password to break into Whopper called social engineering. Social engineering is where the hacker will find out everything he or she can about you in order to guess your passwords and hack into your systems. It's a manipulation technique. It's a confidence game of computing. Sometimes social engineering is just looking at your Facebook posts and determining from that where to go. How many of you have seen a Facebook post that reads, "Don't accept any new friend requests from me. I have been hacked." That's a form of social engineering. The hacker is spoofing a friend's Facebook page in order to get you to accept a friend request from them. They can then study the page and learn everything they can about you. You may or may not be the final target. They may spoof your social media profile to connect to others. I was once socially engineered myself. Fortunately for me, the damage wasn't that serious, but I know people who have been hacked out of thousands of dollars. There are 3 techniques that social engineers use to get what they want. They are called pretexting, waterholing, and baiting. Pretexting is a technique. The hacker invents something to convince you, the user, to divulge information that you wouldn't under normal circumstances. If your grandmother was called and told your sister was stranded on the freeway and that grandma needed to send your sister $400 through an intermediary, that's a pretext attack. There's another classic one. You get a text that reads, "The boss wants you to purchase $600 worth of gift cards from Walmart for the holiday party. Don't worry, you'll be reimbursed. Just give those gift cards to me." That's another pretext attack. Hackers don't always use pretexting to get money. They may use this technique to get passwords or other information. The purpose of the pretext is to gain your trust and confidence. This technique was once used against me. Once you're in the clutches of a pretexter, it is very difficult to defend yourself against it. You have to learn to recognize it for what it is from the beginning. Verify through other channels that the information is correct before you provide anyone with any information or any money. So if somebody calls you and says your granddaughter is stranded on the freeway, call her mother and verify that's where she is. Remember the old adage, if it sounds too good to be true, or in some cases too terrible to be true, it probably is. Waterholing is the next technique of social engineers. It takes advantage of the trust people have in websites. You might be the type of person who would never click on a phishing email, but you wouldn't hesitate to click on a link on a trusted website. In other words, you're being led to the waterhole. My suggestion is that if you see an ad link in a website you trust, Google them instead of clicking on the link. I know somebody who fell victim to this technique and lost $20,000. Yes, they got it all back, but it took some time and some hassle. Phishing is indeed a form of waterholing, and so are those fake profiles on Facebook. What happens if you accept that fake friend request? Sometimes nothing. One time I did, and I had a very interesting messenger conversation while riding the train to work. Then I asked myself, why would somebody strike up such a conversation with me? And I unfriended the fake friend before I was caught in their clutches. Baiting is another form of social engineering. It's like a Trojan horse of sorts. This is where somebody leaves a physical object to take advantage of the curious or greedy, leaving a USB drive, CD-ROM, or some other form of media in a conspicuous place and putting malware on it. That is baiting. In war games, Lightman didn't have to work very hard. They easily found out that his target, Stephen Falcon, had a son named Joshua who had passed away. The hackers correctly guessed that Falcon used Joshua as the password, which brings me to the next topic to discuss, and that is passwords. I have another confession to make. I have been a successful hacker. The only reason I have succeeded was that I was able to guess passwords. I'm not that good of a hacker. Sometimes it is simply too easy. Eventually, however, passwords will become a thing of the past. Sooner or later, there'll be computers that will be able to guess every password in a short period of time. Until then, we have to have better passwords. You may have heard of two-factor authentication. This helps make passwords more secure. The password is something you know. Biometrics like your fingerprint or face pattern or retina are something you are. Your cell phone or key card is something you have. Those are the three common ones. There are others that people don't commonly know about. One of those is location. This can be useful in identifying a hacking attempt. If your office is in Seattle and you last checked in at your desktop PC, you would not be able to log in from Miami 30 minutes later. This is what we call impossible travel. If this had been a thing back in the 1980s, Lightman would not have been successful and we would not have had a movie. How does a computer know where you're located? Well, it's the internet. The internet knows. Actually, your ISP does. And yes, there are personal VPNs which can disguise your location, but the internet knows when you're using one of those too. That's about as deep as I'm going to go into this topic here, but maybe at some point I'll find a movie that'll let me address the fine art of computer networking and how it works. Now back to two-factor authentication. The new one is behavior. For example, the computer can learn how you click on the I am not a robot box on those reCAPTCHA pages. There's a trick to that. You do things with the mouse that a robot can't, and that's basically how the check if you're a robot checkbox knows that you're not a robot. Eventually, computers will learn how to tell if you are under distress or even need medical attention. That's right. One day, your phone will be able to call 911 for you when you need it, like if you're having a heart attack or a stroke or in an accident. That's something incredible, but we're not quite there yet. Let's talk about passwords. According to NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, these are recommendations for password security. First, use a password manager. It will reduce errors in entering passwords, plus it saves you from having to remember passwords. Number 2, password length is more important than complexity. That trick you heard about with replacing O's with zeros and ones with exclamation points and A's with @ signs. Hackers know those tricks as well. But longer passwords are harder to guess. In days of yore, they told you to use the first letter of each word in a phrase, such as LSD for Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. You would put in the password, you would probably say L1SWD. It's actually better to use the entire phrase, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. NIST recommends using the Show Password feature when entering a password. This will ensure that you enter it correctly and remember it correctly. The thing not to do is write it down. This may not apply to everybody, but if you're a small business owner or you're in charge of security at work, you might install breached password protection software or use such features on your authentication program. This will include restrictions against repeated passwords, has complexity enforcement, and will even include a banned password list, so you will never be able to use password as your password. If your password manager has this feature, turn on salting and hashing. This will change something you recognize into something complex and unguessable. One thing to avoid is password hints. A good social engineer can use this to his advantage. And now for something new and counterintuitive, and that is don't change passwords too frequently. Changing passwords too frequently can increase the likelihood that passwords will be written down or forgotten. Yes, change your password from time to time, but not too often. Limit the number of password attempts before being locked out. This will ensure that password cracking robots are less likely to be successful. We've already discussed the use of multi-factor authentication. Here's another plug for it. If you are a password manager or a security manager, use feedback when rejecting a password so that those changing their passwords know what you expect. And finally, keep the special character rule. Allow special characters. This makes for more complex and harder to guess passwords. If warnings about social engineering and careless passwords had been in place in the 1980s, the movie War Games would have been impossible, or perhaps more interesting. War Games is a message film for certain, but by 1983, it was common knowledge that a large-scale nuclear war was unwinnable. It still is. War Games is a fun movie. Yes, the tech has aged a lot, but I recommend the movie. I also recommend guarding against social engineering and against the use of careless passwords. Tune in for our next episode, in which we'll look at the film 9 to 5. We'll discuss whether the actions taken at the end of the film will really increase workplace productivity. It's an interesting discussion. I hope to see you there. Oh